The night pressed heavy against the cabin walls, alive with menace. Coyotes circled in the snow, their cries slicing the silence into shards. Frost clung to the wooden planks, trembling with every echo of hunger from the tree line. Inside, the fire sputtered low, painting shadows across rough-hewn logs. Walter, old and tired, felt the fragility of his world in that moment. The cabin was not a fortress, but a shell. The wilderness was testing its boundaries, pressing closer, demanding reckoning. Yet within the glow of the fire stood another force. Golden eyes glimmered from the corner, fierce and restless. The bobcat, once rescued and frail, now rose with muscle tensed and fur bristling. The wilderness had not come from outside alone. It lived inside his walls, pacing, waiting, preparing to meet the storm with its own untamed fire. The cabin door strained under violent claws, the sound splintering the silence. The bobcat, energy burning like wildfire through its frame, paced with restless urgency. Walter held his breath, lantern trembling in his hand, knowing the enemy waited outside, but realizing the storm inside might be even greater. The wildcat's muscles coiled, pressing against the wooden door like a coiled spring. With sudden force, wood splintered, and the barrier between safety and chaos shattered. Cold air tore into the cabin, dragging snow and shadows with it. The bobcat hurled itself into the night, a streak of spotted muscle meeting the darkness. For a heartbeat, the forest seemed to swallow everything, collapsing into chaos. The old man, rooted in the doorway, realized that the animal he had once nursed was gone. In its place stood the predator it was always meant to be.
Snow became a battlefield. White powder sprayed upward as predators collided, their snarls tearing into the frozen stillness. Coyotes circled, larger and ruthless, but the bobcat moved with rhythm, retreating, striking, lunging again with startling precision. The lantern's light cast frantic shadows across the ground, painting arcs of violence that cut through the night. Walter's breath caught when he saw crimson staining the white, dripping down fur that once lay broken under his arms. For an instant, he feared the creature would collapse, outmatched and overpowered. Then came a sudden surge of ferocity, scattering the pack into the darkness with screams of retreat. Silence settled again, thick and suffocating. The old man looked down to see the wildcat standing, chest heaving, blood on its flank, eyes locked on him with defiance. The bond between man and predator had just been sealed in blood. Weeks before the siege, the forest had been quiet in its first breath of winter. Walter walked the narrow trail he had known for decades, his cane tapping steadily against frozen ground. The air smelled of pine and ice, and the hills glowed faintly with the dying light of autumn. His life had shrunk to survival, measured by wood chopped, meals cooked, and hours endured. Grief lingered with him always, a shadow heavier than the cane he leaned upon. He had learned to live with silence, filling his cabin with the rhythm of routine and the memories of a wife long gone. Yet as the sun slipped behind the ridges that evening, something new waited ahead. A disruption in the snow, a fracture in the ordinary path of solitude lay just around the bend, where fate crouched beneath broken branches.
The silence of the trail broke not with sound, but with sight. Beneath the tangle of fallen branches lay a form that did not belong. Fur, matted with blood, gleamed faintly under the last wash of daylight. Yellow eyes, dulled but burning faintly, blinked through pain and exhaustion. Walter's body froze, his breath sharp in his throat. A bobcat, young yet scarred by struggle, lay sprawled against the snow, sides rising and falling in ragged rhythm. Predators like this were fleeting shadows to him before, glimpsed only at a distance, vanishing into the wild. Now one lay broken at his feet, its claws curved with danger even in weakness. Fear warned him to leave it, to turn away before instinct returned. But compassion, sudden and unwelcome, rooted him in place. The wilderness had delivered him a choice, and it demanded an answer. Walter's boots pressed into the snow, carrying him closer to danger. His breath formed clouds, trembling in the icy air. The bobcat's body shifted faintly, a hiss breaking from its throat, though the strength behind it was fading. Every instinct screamed retreat, but he shrugged off his jacket, bending low over the fragile, trembling mass. The fabric sank against blood and fur, soaking warmth instantly. His calloused hands slid beneath the animal, lifting it against his chest. Its body felt heavy yet fragile, strength drained but claws still threatening. The journey back to the cabin stretched endlessly, each step burdened by both weight and doubt. The snow crunched beneath his boots, marking a trail of defiance against instinct. As the wind howled through the trees, Walter pressed forward, carrying not only the animal, but the decision that would define him.
The cabin welcomed him with firelight flickering faintly against the gloom. He placed the animal onto a wool blanket near the hearth, its sides heaving, eyes clouded. For a moment he stood uncertain, staring at the broken creature he had brought inside. His hands were not skilled, his tools not made for healing, yet surrender felt impossible. He boiled water, tore cloth, and worked with trembling care, cleaning and binding the wound. The animal flinched under his touch, but did not resist. Hours dragged on, broken only by the storm pressing against the walls and the shallow rhythm of breaths at his feet. Walter remained awake, his body rigid, listening for silence that might mean death. When dawn crept into the cabin, pale and cold, the breaths were steadier, fragile, but holding. The battle for survival had begun. Morning revealed a shift so small it could have been missed. A bowl of water rested by the animal's side, untouched for hours. Then, at last, the predator's tongue flicked, lapping weakly, yet with intent. Walter exhaled, a silent release of tension that had bound him through the night. This was more than thirst quenched, it was acceptance, however faint. Over the following days, he repeated the cycle: clean, bind, watch, wait. Each day the creature's eyes cleared, suspicion softening slightly under the steady glow of the fire. The line between survival and surrender blurred. When the bobcat stirred one morning and pushed unsteady legs beneath itself, Walter's chest tightened. The predator rose, trembling but upright. A step forward had been taken, not only by the animal, but by the fragile bond forming between man and wild.
Time reshaped the creature. At first, it lifted only its head, watching with quiet intensity as Walter moved around the cabin. Soon, muscles strengthened, and it stretched, pressing tentative weight onto healing legs. Within weeks, it wandered the room, tail brushing against wooden furniture, paws tapping cautiously across worn boards. Walter watched each movement, his heart torn between awe and unease. He knew the truth of the wild, that instincts never vanished, that teeth and claws were not dulled by firelight. Yet what he saw unsettled that truth. The bobcat's gaze followed him, softened at his voice, and remained steady when he drew near. Each day its presence shifted from intruder to companion. Each evening his solitude lessened, replaced by a bond neither had sought, but both had begun to depend on for reasons beyond survival. One night, as the fire crackled low, exhaustion dragged Walter into half-sleep. The room was quiet, shadows long across the walls. Then, against his worn boots, a subtle pressure rested, warm and steady. Opening his eyes, he saw it, the bobcat curled beside him, body relaxed, chest rising in calm rhythm. The sight stole his breath. This was no fleeting accident, no desperate grasp for warmth. It was trust, placed at his feet in silent offering. For years, his cabin had been a tomb of echoes, empty save for the groan of timber and the sigh of wind. Now it held life, a creature born of wilderness, choosing to rest by him. His hand trembled as he reached down, stopping short of touch, afraid to break the fragile moment. In that stillness, he felt loneliness retreat.
Nights unfolded into rituals. The bobcat sprawled across the rug, paws flexing against wool, eyes gleaming gold in the firelight. Walter sat nearby, the warmth of coffee in his hands, watching the impossible scene. A predator, raised by the wild, lay calm and unthreatening in the heart of a cabin. Yet he knew the transformation was fragile, a mask over instincts carved by blood and survival. Every twitch of muscle, every flicker of gaze reminded him that wilderness slept only lightly. Still, the contradiction mesmerized him. He found himself speaking aloud again, words filling a silence that had long consumed him. The bobcat's gaze held steady, attentive in ways that stirred forgotten memories of companionship. For the first time in years, his words did not vanish into emptiness. The fire had given him more than warmth. It had returned an audience. The presence of the predator pulled at threads of memory Walter had hidden deep. Its shallow breathing and restless nights recalled the sounds of his late wife's illness. The steady weight at his boots mirrored the barn cats of his youth, simple companions long gone. Each reminder cracked the silence that grief had sealed. He had spoken her name aloud one evening, not expecting answer, but the bobcat's ears twitched, head tilting faintly as though hearing. The fire crackled between them, weaving past and present together. What once felt like unbearable solitude shifted into fragile connection, born not of language, but of shared presence. Walter realized that the creature was not only filling emptiness, it was reshaping grief, teaching him that healing sometimes came not with people, but with the silent company of the wild choosing to remain.
The illusion fractured without warning. At dusk, the bobcat's eyes locked on movement outside, a deer passing silent through snow. Instantly, the predator surged against the window, claws raking wood, muscles straining with raw instinct. Walter recoiled, fear jolting through him. The companion of firelight had vanished. In its place stood the predator of blood. Days followed with reminders. Cupboards lay torn open, jars shattered, flour scattered like dust across boards. The cabin bore the marks of a hunter testing its cage. Each outburst spoke truth. Wilderness could not be extinguished, only quieted for moments. Walter watched, torn between awe at its power and fear for his own safety. He understood now that he had not tamed it. He had only sheltered it, and the wild heart inside it had begun to beat louder than ever. Whispers spread beyond the cabin walls. Neighbors visited, faces drawn tight with unease. Their voices carried warning, certain that one day the predator would remember what it was and turn against the hand that fed it. Wild blood, they said, never truly fades. Walter listened, silent beneath their words, but the weight of doubt began to press into him. At night, when the bobcat's gaze followed his every step, he sometimes wondered if they were right. Could he trust a bond built across instincts that had not been erased? Yet each morning, when fur brushed his boots, when golden eyes softened near the fire, he saw something no warning could erase. Two truths battled within him: the danger of a predator's nature and the undeniable bond that had begun to save his life in quiet ways.
The test of family brought the conflict to his doorstep. Clara, his niece, entered the cabin with hope, carrying concern for the man she believed too isolated. Relief turned to alarm when her gaze fell on the bobcat stretched across the armchair, its presence commanding the room. The predator rose, muscles rippling, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Clara's body stiffened, retreat written in every step. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken threat. Though the animal settled back onto the chair, the damage lingered. Clara's fear drove her away, her departure leaving silence sharper than before. Her absence carved doubt deeper into Walter's heart. If those bound by blood could not see the bond he had built, perhaps they were right to fear. The fragile companionship he clung to now carried the weight of judgment and risk. Clara's visit left the cabin colder than the snow outside. Family, once his anchor, had recoiled from the sight of the predator he had come to trust. Her retreat carved a wound deeper than any claw. The old man sat alone in the dimming firelight, hearing echoes of her warning in the stillness. The bobcat lay nearby, silent yet watchful, embodying both the reason for her fear and the solace she could not understand. The cabin had become a world divided, one of judgment beyond its walls and a fragile bond within them. Walter felt the weight of that division press upon his chest. In the animal's presence, he felt purpose. In the absence of his kin, he felt the sharp sting of isolation return. The choice he had made grew heavier, but the bond demanded his loyalty more fiercely than ever.
The forest unleashed its fury one night in the form of a storm. Snow fell thick and relentless, bending trees and smothering paths. Winds howled against the cabin, seeping cold through its seams. Walter, old bones aching, braced himself against the weight of nature's assault. Then came the sudden crack of timber, sharp and violent. The porch roof collapsed under the burden of snow, splintering into ruin. The ground shook with the impact, sending Walter stumbling toward the door. The storm's wrath was not content to stay outside. It had reached for him directly, tearing away the fragile barrier between his world and the wilderness. He slipped on ice, lantern shattering at his feet, pain radiating through his body. For a moment he lay stunned, the storm closing in, his breath clouding against the bitter dark. The icy boards struck him hard, knocking the air from his chest. Shards of lantern glass glittered across the snow, catching faint light before being swallowed by the storm. Walter's body refused to move, bones protesting, muscles trembling with weakness. The cold cut through him, sharp and merciless, numbing his hands and blurring his thoughts. Snow began to settle against his body, as though the wilderness itself were claiming him. He knew, with a grim certainty, that rising would mean survival, but failing would mean surrender to the storm. His cabin stood only steps away, yet in that moment it felt like a mountain. Breath escaped in ragged gasps, each one stolen by the wind. The predator's instincts had nearly consumed his cabin days earlier, but now the old man's fight against nature faltered where even predators could not help.
Out of the storm's chaos came movement, low, powerful, and unyielding. The bobcat pressed its weight against him, circling, returning, refusing to leave his side. Its fur bristled with snow, its body trembling with defiance against the storm. Golden eyes fixed on him with an intensity that pierced through the haze of pain. Again and again, the animal nudged, urged, and guarded, its growls slicing into the wind as if warning the storm itself to keep away. The predator's body became both shield and guide, holding the old man to life when his own strength faltered. With effort drawn from instinct more than will, Walter crawled back into the cabin, the bobcat pacing close, never breaking its vigil. In that moment, predator became protector, wild heart became guardian, and a bond once fragile hardened under the weight of survival shared. The storm raged outside, battering the cabin with relentless fury, but within its walls, a fragile calm settled. Walter slumped into his chair, chest aching, breath ragged. Across from him, the bobcat sprawled upon the rug, its eyes fixed on him, unblinking and constant. The predator did not return to rest. Instead, it watched, as though ensuring each breath rose and fell. The firelight flickered over blood and snow clinging to its fur, painting it in shades of both battle and sanctuary. Hours passed in this vigil, man and beast locked in silent acknowledgement of what had transpired. Walter's survival had not been secured by wood, fire, or strength, but by the untamed spirit of the creature he had once doubted. In the howl of the storm, he heard something new, the rhythm of trust solidified in silence.
In the days that followed, the storm's memory lingered. The bobcat prowled the cabin with heightened restlessness, instincts sharpening daily. At times it was the predator, stalking shadows on the wall, crouching in sudden pounces, muscles rippling with violence. At other times, it was the companion, settling by the fire, eyes soft, movements calm. Walter lived within this contradiction, torn between fear and wonder. He swept broken jars from the floor, patched damage from claws, and yet when golden eyes met his in moments of stillness, his heart softened. The creature embodied two worlds, the untamed wilderness and the fragile sanctuary of home. It was impossible to tell which world would claim it in the end. Yet Walter knew that whatever balance existed now could not last forever. The tension was growing, the wild within pressing harder for release. Night returned with a new sound, the eerie cry of coyotes echoing through the valley. The calls rose and fell in waves, chilling in their persistence. Walter stood rigid, his heart remembering countless nights spent listening to the rhythms of the forest. But this sound was different. It carried intent, hunger sharpened into strategy. The bobcat rose instantly, its fur bristling, body quivering with anticipation. Golden eyes burned like embers in the firelight, reflecting a predator's readiness. Walter felt the weight of dread tighten in his chest. The wilderness had not forgotten him, and now it demanded confrontation. Outside, the forest shifted with movement, shadows gathering at the edge of the tree line. The air grew taut, the cabin no longer shield, but target. What began as a cry in the distance became a summons, drawing danger to his door.
The cries grew louder, closer, until eyes glowed faintly at the edge of the clearing. The cabin's fire cast dim light, struggling against the tide of darkness pressing in. Walter stood by the door, every sense aware of the fragile barrier that separated him from the wilderness. The bobcat prowled in restless circles, tail lashing, each step a declaration of defiance. The night grew heavier with each heartbeat, filled with anticipation of what was coming. The air itself felt charged, ready to split open. Coyotes, clever and patient, tested the silence, moving closer, their forms flickering in and out of shadow. The old man knew his choices were few: remain within the fragile safety of walls, or step into the storm of claws and teeth. The moment stretched unbearably, each second sharpening into inevitability. Fear pressed down harder than the storm had. Walter's hand lingered over the wooden latch, torn by conflict. To keep the bobcat inside meant containing a force of nature within fragile walls. To open the door meant unleashing it into a battle that could claim its life. Memories surged through him. The wounded predator lying helpless in snow, the fragile breaths on his cabin floor, the weight curled against his boots. Each moment replayed as both comfort and warning. His heart raced, knowing whichever choice he made carried risk. The fire popped sharply, echoing like a warning shot. Outside, the circling predators grew restless, claws scraping faintly on frozen earth. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Fear consumed him, not of the coyotes, not of the wildcat, but of the decision no man should have to make.
The choice was stolen from him by violence. Claws raked against the wooden door, splitting the night with sharp cracks. The coyotes lunged against the cabin, their bodies slamming the walls with hunger and frenzy. The bobcat, instincts ignited, hurled itself at the barrier, each impact shaking with frame. Walter stumbled back, lantern swaying, as the storm of predators erupted at his threshold. The cabin's walls groaned, wood straining against the onslaught. The firelight danced wildly, shadows leaping in chaotic arcs. The air filled with the sounds of claws, snarls, and the primal fury of creatures demanding blood. The siege was no longer looming, it was upon him, clawing, howling, and tearing its way through the fragile sanctuary he had built. In the heart of the storm, Walter realized the wilderness had come to claim what it believed was its own. The moment broke with a splintering crack. Walter's trembling hand released the latch, and the door gave way to the chaos beyond. The winter night rushed in, carrying with it the cries of hunger and the sting of frozen air. The coyote shot forward like a living weapon, fur bristling, muscles alive with purpose. Its body became a blur, swallowed instantly by the snowstorm of predators. The old man staggered back, lantern light spilling weakly into the clearing. He could do nothing but watch as his companion vanished into the frenzy. For an instant, he wondered if he had just doomed the creature he had nursed to life. But the wild had always belonged to the wilderness, and tonight it surged forth in full, answering the call of blood with claws sharpened by trust and defiance.
Snow erupted into violence as predator met predator. The coyotes lunged with coordinated ferocity, their bodies circling and snapping with ruthless hunger. But the bobcat moved with blinding speed, its strikes precise and unrelenting. Teeth sank, claws slashed, and the clearing filled with the brutal sounds of survival. Walter stood frozen at the threshold, eyes wide, heart pounding with helplessness. Each clash tore through the silence of the valley, echoing across the night. Blood sprayed against the snow, red against white, proof of the battle's ferocity. The coyotes, stronger in number, pressed in again and again, but the bobcat countered with instinct born of untamed wilderness. The fight was primal, savage, terrifying. Walter felt every blow as though his own life hung in the balance, the wild creature's survival entwined with his own fragile hope. With a surge of violence, the bobcat leapt upon the largest of the coyotes, jaws locking into its shoulder. A cry split the night, sending the pack scattering into the forest, tails tucked, bodies retreating into darkness. Silence fell suddenly, the echoes of the battle drifting away with the wind. The snow lay churned and crimson-stained, a battlefield carved into wilderness. In its center stood the bobcat, chest heaving, flanks marked with fresh wounds. Lantern light caught in its golden eyes, burning with the intensity of survival. It turned slowly back toward the cabin, each step leaving crimson marks upon the snow. For a moment, the predator seemed impossibly large, the embodiment of raw defiance. Then, with quiet resolve, it returned, crossing the threshold not as conqueror or captive, but as something unspoken.
something greater than either.
Word traveled swiftly through the valley. Neighbors shook their heads in disbelief, muttering that wild blood would one day betray the old man. Yet beneath their judgment lingered unease. The story of the battle spread, carried on in whispers. A bobcat had defended a cabin against a pack of coyotes. Walter, silent to their doubts, sat by his fire, his companion stretched across the rug, licking wounds in steady rhythm. The predator bore fresh scars, but its presence was unbroken, its eyes clear. The community might never understand, but the bond had been tested and tempered in fire and blood. Doubt still lingered in their voices, but Walter needed no argument. The proof lay at his feet, a wild heart that had chosen to remain, defying the wilderness beyond with loyalty few would ever believe. Winter deepened, snow pressing heavier against the cabin, but within its walls warmth endured. Each evening the predator curled near the fire, its body steady against the boots of the old man. He knew the wilderness would always call, that one day paw prints might vanish into the trees, leaving only silence behind. Yet for now the bond held. It was not built of ownership nor taming, but of trust forged through danger, loss, and survival. The man had carried the predator from the forest, but in ways far deeper, the predator had carried him from despair. Their lives, once marked by isolation, had converged into companionship written not in words but in presence. As firelight dimmed and snow whispered outside, the old man closed his eyes, knowing both had been rescued, bound by the unspoken truth of survival shared.